Well, then with that, let's go ahead and turn it over then to our presentations and discussions. So first up, we have the Central Jordan River Reconnect Master Plan. Brandon, who just introduced himself, Brandon Biederman, who's Associate Principal and Project Manager with a consulting team from Port, will present an update on the ongoing master plan for the Central Jordan River Reconnect project. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Brandon, and thank you again for joining us today and presenting on this project.
While he's pulling that up, Dan, do you want to say anything by way of introduction?
Yeah, maybe. Brandon and his firm Port, we hired them to help revision this portion of the river and to plan its future recreation opportunities. So it's being, I guess, supported through the park planning sector of Salt Lake County. Brandon's been doing a great job, so I'm going to give the control back to him.
Thank you.
Sorry, thought I had the mute button. Thanks, Dan, and thank you all for the time to be able to share this work with you today and be able to get your feedback. I was able to meet with Soren and kind of go through a pretty similar presentation, albeit we've made a few kind of tweaks and advancements as we have moved forward. And again, we'll kind of go through a schedule here and whatnot, but as Dan outlined, this project came along last year, kind of about mid-year, and was through the state legislation of the kind of Jordan River recreation area is what is funding this plan. And the county has shared that their ambition for this plan is for it to be really a process that involves all the jurisdictions and stakeholders. So there's 5 jurisdictions plus yourself, as well as a technical advisory committee and the public in general. And so this plan is kind of trying to form through that. I'll hit a real high level on the top of that. I do have a number of slides here, so I'm going to try to move through at a steady pace, but hopefully it all is fairly, fairly clear. I talked to Soren and we'll share this document immediately after, so it'll be there available for your reference. And of course, anytime now and in the future, we'd love to continue to hear your feedback and input as we continue to move through this plan. So as Dan had outlined, we were brought on by the Salt Lake County to work through this plan, and we've worked with them to develop project stakeholders, which includes the Jordan River Commission, of course, the municipalities, and we have a technical advisory committee that includes the U.S. Army Corps, flood fires and state lands, climate flood control, and the kind of list goes on that we're working with there. And then Port, we're an urban design and planning and landscape architecture firm. We have offices in Chicago and Philadelphia and work at a range of different scales, from kind of urban plazas, large parks that we have in Boise, Bentonville, Knoxville, Tennessee, and elsewhere, and then kind of larger planning projects such as this one. I've listed the 2 kind of primary partners that have surfaced as we've moved forward on this project. So Rio ASE is our hydrological engineer, and they're really working with us on river restoration and ecological improvements throughout the corridor. And then Pros Consulting, which is a nationally recognized practice for helping with management, operations, governance, and funding strategies on anywhere from kind of city system parks all the way up to kind of state park systems and national park systems. And then we do have a series of other consultants on board that are helping us advise where necessary: ecosystem sciences, ORIX, Zion Public Finance, and SOMAS. The agenda basically is to kind of show you the schedule that we have with the county, the kind of goals and priorities of the plan, and the public outreach and stakeholder engagement that has been conducted thus far, where we're at with a kind of in progress conceptual framework plan, and next steps. This is kind of the overview of the project schedule. So we really saw this as a 4-part endeavor. starting with connecting and really raising awareness and hearing from the community, hearing from the public, hearing from stakeholders, with then imagining with the community, with the public, and kind of working through that. That all occurred in Q3 and Q4 of 2024. The project was then paused for a little bit as the county kind of got its resources in place and did some review to make sure that the kind of part two of the plan development was on track to be able to move forward. And so we're currently in the kind of what you see number 3 there, the conceptualizing. That's really September through kind of October. And then part 4 is the culmination kind of in February or March of next year. So you're kind of seeing that schedule laid out here. We're working through the kind of preferred plan and concept frameworks. We're building up towards the stakeholder prep here, which is really actually putting an informal discussion of this similar presentation in front of all the planning commissions for the 5 jurisdictions. Of course, this meeting here, as well as in front of the GRC governing board in December. We also have a series of technical advisories. We've met already with U.S. Army Corps. We've met with the flood control, the county flood control. We're meeting with the DNR shortly here, and kind of making sure that we're getting this reviewed and in front of all, important agencies and stakeholders across the corridor. Final plan then kind of works through December and January into February, with the idea at the end of February or March. The hope of the county and the hope of our project team is that this is formally adopted by the jurisdictions, the 5 jurisdictions, incorporated into, it varies depending on the jurisdiction, but either their general plan or their Parks and Rec plan or similar. So this is kind of that summary of that schedule. So we're really working through this kind of advancing of the framework strategies, the plan strategies. This document I'm sharing with you now is like an in process for what we're preparing to send out on the 24th that will go in front of the planning commissions. This is kind of larger because you're all jurisdiction as the entire Jordan River, whereas the ones towards the planning commissions will be brought down kind of to their specific areas. And then we will work towards the kind of December through March kind of phase 4 plan completion, as outlined in that schedule before. So just to kind of give an overview, the project area that was designated and the project area that we're working within is from 5400 south all the way up to 201 south, SR 201 south. And so again, you're seeing the 5 jurisdictions here: Murray, Taylorsville, Mill Creek, West Valley, and South Salt Lake. And really this looks at about, it's 200, the designation is 250 yards to either side of the river corridor. And of course, we're focusing on lands that are within county or kind of friendly partner lands that have an ability to move forward, as well as working with the municipalities on potential development opportunities. So really looking at around 846 acres of land that are inclusive to this plan. So quite a large area through this extents. We went through a whole series of community engagement, as I had mentioned. This included a lot of pop-up events where we had big boards and maps. We did some open houses. We did, a whole series of these throughout the summer, June into the fall, and we were able to get a lot of input from the community. And all of this was, excuse me? Oh, okay. And able to get a bunch of this into the in front of the public and raise awareness and really get some really good feedback across the project. We've taken all that and really started to think about that in conjunction, both kind of geographically, where some of these comments that were both safety concerns as well as desirable improvements and amenities, and positive comments about what people used, what people saw as really great resources for them and their families. And that really led us to these kind of aspirations for a more connected, more active, healthy river corridor system. And we took these themes forward as a kind of the groundwork or the base for the project as we've moved forward. And so just looking at those kind of primary themes, you'll see these kind of moving as we continue forward. The other kind of part of this is, as we broke this down and started to think about what that meant, and again, you'll start to see that unfold as we move forward. after the community engagement, as we kind of re-kicked off in this year, one of our first priorities was to get in front of the 5 jurisdictions. And we met with Soren with the JRC to just start to understand and really do an interactive kind of workshop on what priorities they already have going on existing, what are their kind of dream desires, where are some of their challenges. And this involved really sketching out and just starting to understand where things were at. And those really became a baseline that between the community and public input and the kind of conversations we had about the active projects and priorities of the different stakeholders, we really laid the foundation of this plan into these kind of same series of buckets, but just defining further what those are endeavoring to do here. Since then, we've been really working to kind of, let's say, take all of the different kind of priorities across these jurisdictions and stakeholders and bring them together to start to think about this as a more cohesive corridor and how we can find alignments and kind of shared resources to be able to really build forward as this plan would unfold over the coming years in the future. And this is just the digitized version of that I can walk through here as we go forward. But again, really trying to compile all of the projects and priorities that we see, trying to address a lot of the challenges that we've heard. And also kind of paying attention to development opportunities that are either in process or have been scoped through the station area plans and other kind of other developments to be able to understand what their effect would be on the activation of the Jordan River corridor. So I'm going to kind of go through each of these, but there's also these system-wide goals that we've really tried to pull out of these conversations. And one is connected communities. So really looking at how can we get a trail on both sides across this corridor? And how can we increase public access points so that there are more ways in which both individuals and users can access the trail and the waterway and the recreational assets of the Jordan River corridor, but also from a safety perspective. So how our police and fire and maintenance able to access the Jordan River to ensure that it's a safe and inclusive place for all and well-maintained place for all. So looking at some initial diagrams, you're kind of seeing the gaps of trail on both sides right now. Currently, there really isn't a whole lot of designated trail on both sides. So these would be the series or sections that we'd be looking to address getting a trail on both sides. And you're also seeing kind of some of the gaps in the kind of access points. And we want to make sure that we're providing a rhythm or a series of access points along it. And some of the benefits of the trail on both sides are both an increase in access, of course, because you can kind of approach it from both ways, move along it. It starts to create loops in which people can, use the trail on more circuit level and versus an out back. It also provides increased safety with the kind of section here showing visual access across. So even if you might be the only person currently on one side, you still have more bodies, more eyes to feel safer as using the trail system. Healthy river corridor is a really important aspect of this project. Looking at ecological restoration activities, habitat and water quality, and looking at how we might long-term restore some of the floodplain connections that exist throughout this section of the corridor. So we really worked with Rio to start to identify where there are areas which the county has expanded kind of land that allow us to both have expanded kind of ownership of land, but also where the river has been straightened over the years, and how there can be some measures that we can start to both bring back some of the natural fluidity of the river itself and activate some wetlands and riparian ecological areas within these zones. And so you're kind of seeing some of these kind of 4 primary areas that we've been focusing on for some of the bigger moves here. And then activating the river, so looking at increased water access. Where are the existing boat launches? Where are the abilities for people to get down to the water, to fish or to be able to, touch the water, play in the water. And so looking at how we can start to build out those. And then looking at all the wonderful kind of amenities that exist today and how we can either enhance or build on those as we move forward so that there's, again, continual rhythm of those moving down throughout the corridor. And then a really big one that we've heard from a lot of stakeholders and been talking a lot with the county is the operations and maintenance strategy and how we might start to work towards a single entity for management oversight, so that there is a consistent maintenance across the level. There's consistent signage, as recently been put in by the county, but how can that kind of start to build out in both identity for the trail access points, as well as how the kind of parks work across the spectrum, including amenities like restrooms and other. And then also looking at how this would be both funded and financed. So financed on a kind of annual level for this maintenance and programming, different kind of programming across it, but also, the implementation of some of these projects. And that's our pros consulting, our consultant for kind of management, governance, and operations is working through ideas for how we can start to really move towards this kind of more cohesive, let's say, ownership across this. So you're kind of seeing really this idea that this whole series throughout the corridor and within the county lands and city lands could start to be approached in a more cohesive manner. That's kind of the overview of some of the system-wide things that we've been looking at. And then from a standpoint of starting to talk about some of the more specific projects and how we've approached this is really looking at focus areas in which we're able to think about as individual projects for implementation strategies, meaning it's more easy to think about funding and ultimately implementing if we break these out into bite-size bite-sized different projects. And for that, we've really thought of this in 7 segments that actually was more addressed by themes than it was themes that started to uncover through these conversations than it is by jurisdictional boundary or kind of land ownership or similar. So we'll be working from the south to the north, so downriver towards the north. And I'll try to go through these a little bit quickly, just so we have time for discussion, any questions or thoughts you all have. But I'm happy to flip back to these, as we move through. The kind of build is always the same, so you'll get a consistency here. But this first segment, which starts at 5400 south and moves north, is really about neighborhood connections. This is Murray on the south and Taylorsville on the north, Murray on the east and Taylorsville on the west. North is Page Right. We're really that there's quite a bit of amenity already here and some care in the trail systems and the kind of parks that you're seeing, both with Germania and with Mill Race. And so this was really about neighborhood connections here. You're seeing that the trail right now exists on the east side of the path, and then Mill Race Park has the boat launch areas there. Just seeing some of the existing images for that. And really in this zone, the primary thought here is some ecological enhancements that we think could really help to bring back some of the fluidness of the stream in this area and provide some kind of riparian and wetland restoration, as well as get another trail in here that we're thinking more of kind of as a boardwalk. Another part of that project is to look at the kind of trail connection up to the Jordan Canal trail. And we've been talking with Taylorsville about that. And then also the expansion of the Up-and-L corridor trail improvements. So the Jordan Trail connection is looking at kind of a both side connection from Mill Race and the Jordan River Trail into the Jordan Canal trail system. And this is something that Taylorsville has been studying in with one of their engineers. And we're kind of supporting that project as part of this process. And then the Up-and-L corridor trail exists through this segment. We're really thinking about expanding that so that you're able to connect across through different communities there. And then a bigger kind of portion of this is really looking and working with Rio about how we can start to essentially bring back in some of the historic river channels as they existed previously, so that you start to get a little bit more of that natural flow throughout that area. And then actually some of the main channels would move towards side channels, and you would then, look at some wetlands and other opportunities within this area. Also looking at the pond at Mill Race Park here and how putting a side channel through that would help with flow, and being able to have that pond have a little bit more movement so you don't get the algae buildup that is currently there today. The next segment to the north, we were looking at as 3 parks confluence, so really looking to unify the amenities that exist there, Confluence Park, Little Confluence Trailhead, and Arrowhead Park. This is also where the Kennecott Nature Center for Murray is. You're seeing, again, the trail continues on the east side, and then crosses over to the west side after Murray-Taylorsville Road. So this area, again, just some of the images of these three different parks, and trying to think about how we could think of these parks more of it as a unified benefit that would be a destination for these communities and neighbors to be able to come to, and kind of building on each other versus being redundant to each other. There's also some ideas for ecological improvements through here. Again, we have a little bit of an expanded land to work with here. And of course, trying to get the path on the other side. So you're seeing the kind of path on the west side being added here in orange. And then some of the connectors, this being that Up and L connector as it continues over to Taylorsville. So again, just looking at one of the examples from Rio of the successful restoration in Greeley, Colorado. And in this section, because of the limited width, thinking about this kind of boardwalk idea that would move through there, but wider than the boardwalk in Murray, where it becomes a both multimodal opportunity. And again, this is just showing some of the ecological improvements through here, and thinking again about some sign channels that would provide some amenities to the Kennecott Nature Center and this general area. Moving to the north on segment 3, this is more about ecological. We call this ecological spine. It's really trail and habitat focused. There's kind of limited redevelopment opportunities, but we can look at some strategic options here. This is also where the memorial is, and so being able to think about that amenity. So the World War II memorial here, and thinking about that amenity and its improvements. You also get a pretty dynamic difference as you move through the residential complex and the kind of area to the south as you start to see some of the industry across the river here. So again, the trail now being on the west side. This is looking at getting a trail on the east side. So you start to build out some more of those loops, and then thinking about some simple parking access to that memorial. So it's more more accessible to folks than it currently is today. And then Four Corners Commons. So this is really looking at the idea of a shared municipal park where General Home and General Home and then the trailhead are. And so thinking about kind of ecological expansion of this and starting to really think of this these parks as this broader area, and that you could have some nature walk loops that are affiliated with those. So you both have kind of focused areas of program, but then these kind of larger passive recreation opportunities that are part of that. So just looking again at the Mill Creek Trailhead and General Home Park being expanded out into this area where the county has some additional land ownership. And so you're starting to see the path coming in where it crosses over here and taking advantage of that existing new bridge here, and how that can continue on the east side, as well as a loop that could exist here on the west side as part of some of these ecological restorations. And then also looking at a potential new road in here to connect Riverboat Road up into 3900 South here. So again, just some ideas of how that might start to have both the passive and active kind of recreation or programming opportunities, being able to get down to the water a bit more, and really making this a little bit of a kind of destination area, because it is central and has all 4 jurisdictions meeting here at this exact point. This is that road channel, and just thinking about using the existing maintenance road along the golf course edge there to provide this connection through, but thinking of this more as a park drive, so a slower point where you would have a series of parking spaces off of it to start to provide access into this area, and being able to have it be something that you can come into and be able to use this kind of series of trail loops that we're talking about. And then also looking at a new trailhead potentially at the end of Carlisle Street. And so we have some calls with UTA to start to talk about how we could have an access point here. There's a pretty large gap at this moment. And then utilizing this kind of space in here to have a little bit more formal trailhead with some basic amenities. And again, that'd be part of those river restoration efforts we were looking at, which are shown on this slide here So we have that wider or kind of expanded county land. So starting to see a number of these side channels, wetlands, and potential ponds that could be incorporated into this. Segment 5, as we continue to move further north, there's kind of a limited series of improvements that we're showing here. It's really along the kind of Tracy Aviary Nature Center. So we're just looking at this is kind of a part that notably has some security issues or some safety issues because you are sort of locked on the trail for an extended period. And so just looking at some opportunities to help to alleviate some of those safety issues and provide some outs, as well as thinking of and working with the Tracy Aviary Nature Center and how there can be that can both complement these kind of improvements and provide that kind of nature center amenity for a lot of the other jurisdictions within this area here. And we have a meeting coming up. I know a representative from Tracy Aviary is on here, and I believe we're trying to get a meeting set up with you all to be able to talk through this more directly. I'm glad you're able to get to see this up front here. But really looking at, again, trying to get a trail on the other side. So you would have trail on both sides, allowing a bit more movement through here. And then also looking at a series of connectors that allow you access and out, thinking of these public access points. And then a new trail link that can help with being able to come under that bridge and being able to connect up to 3300. So something I know that West Valley has been working with the Aviary on. Not West Valley, but South Lake has been working with the Aviary on, and being able to have a connection here as you come out. And then just thinking about potential opportunities to work with the Aviary on providing a little bit more buffer zone through there so that people don't feel so constrained when they're passing somebody and feel a little safer. Then segment 6, which is the second to the last segment to the north here. This is the Oxbow jail for reference here. And kind of the biggest opportunity lies here because of the redwood conservation area. And so obviously there's a bunch of amenities up here. You've got the rec center that is currently being currently having a program study done for improvements to that. You've got the Utah Cultural Center, and then of course this kind of conservation area here, which has a few trails going through that. You're seeing that kind of area here and these kind of let's say more park-like trails that run through. The main JRP trail runs on the east side through most of this area and then switches over to the west side and then carries across. Just a couple of existing pictures so you can start to understand the kind of space that we have here. It's a wetland designated area. One of the things that has happened recently is the Brighton Canal was filled in and is no longer charging these. So we were looking at opportunities for how we could charge those wetlands, but also thinking of this as a county destination park. So how can this really start to have some new programming in it? How can this start to have both active and passive recreation opportunities and its relation to the Jordan River and the kind of trail system? Also, kind of connecting these little segments here so that you get a trail on both sides throughout this area. And you can start to see, again, these kind of interconnected loops that get set up on the Jordan River Trail itself. Some of the programming we've been thinking about here are just ideas for, how the water, how you can start to have the wetlands expanded so you have larger pond access. You have these kind of amenities, both, again, passive and active recreation and being able to get down into the water more, and also having your kind of riparian ecology be more productive, and having interpretive signage or other kind of learning possibilities that could occur here, as well as, again, fishing or being able to kind of just enjoy the natural settings of this area. And again, some of the more active programs could be all-wheel park or similar, or other kind of amenities, play, nature play, etc., that could start to find its place in different areas within this zone. And then right at Mill Creek, there's a portion of land, and we've had conversations with Salt Lake City about having a trailhead in this area, because there isn't one necessarily on the east side for a stretch here, and being able to connect that into the kind of overall trail system And there are some ecological opportunities here as well. So thinking about a more passive kind of trailhead or system. And then this is where Rio is currently, and this is something we are definitely still in conversations with. We've talked with both the U.S. Army Corps Section 404 and flood control. And overall, I think there's excitement for some of the opportunities here, but it's definitely something we need to run by Section 408 with the U.S. Army Corps, given the kind of federal jurisdictional levies that come through here. But some opportunities to recharge these wetlands through the Chesterfield Canal here, which might also help with the water quality of the canal itself, and being able to provide some of these kind of internalized ponds and riparian ecological areas. We're also looking at a few side channels that can naturally come in kind of along the Oxbow Park and this Oxbow Jail area. The last section here is where we have the kind of straightest corridor as it moves into the levee system. And so really here, just a little bit limited, but of course, trying to get a trail on both sides. The trail right now is on the west side. You do have a more an existing kind of maintenance trail that is paved, but not designated on the east side. So thinking about how, again, you could start to create some loops in here and provide access both from West Valley and South Lake. And also starting to think about the kind of industrial edge here and how, within the restrictions of the levee itself and the kind of U.S. Army Corps requirements, how you can start to provide a little bit more buffer there so that it's a nicer experience as you move along that area. And then also looking at Redwood Park and the existing amenities there and how that could start to become improved and provide a little bit more connection to the Jordan River itself. So again, just showing that kind of landscape buffer as that moves along, and you're seeing that kind of formalization of that trail and crossing over into that kind of Mill Creek trailhead that I had mentioned. And then the connection along Mill Creek Trail, as well as looking at some other options to be able to connect down into South Lake. One thing at Redwood Trailhead already is that there's a boat project, a boat launch or I guess more boat takeout. It's kind of the last point before you reach the weir a little bit further downstream. This is already under review with the U.S. Army Corps. So we're showing this as kind of a near term, but really looking at the potential for Redwood Park and the kind of potential of this acquisition of this piece of parcel just to the north as being a water-based recreation hub. And this is something that could, I think, both support kayaking and boating, as well as potentially kind of a base for crew. One of the things that we're also looking at with Rio is that we're further downstream and how that might be adjusted or improved so that you can boat over it so that you would have access into the longer straight section. And then again, just looking at some precedents for how we could start to think about improving that buffer zone along both on the levee itself, but also working with the kind of the owners of the industrial area here to have a bit more kind of landscaping and planting between the kind of parking in their building and this public space, this public amenity. And a really good example that Soren had pointed out to me is Radius Engineering that exists.
Yeah, Radius Engineering property there.
Yeah, and so kind of using that as a precedent in some other kind of industrial improvement areas that we've seen to be able to make that a better space going through from a public perspective as you move along that river. Again, looking at this connection along Mill Creek, there's already the kind of gravel path here, maintenance path here. This is something else we are talking with UTA about to see if we can get an access point here. Currently, this is gated off. So that's a series of projects. And so really thinking about this as kind of this comprehensive plan that starts to build across and has a frequency within the corridor that we feel really is beneficial to all of the jurisdictions and users within the area here, and again starting to help build on what's already there and again, providing more of that access and providing some more of the kind of incentive for activity here that starts to change the way in which the kind of culture of this area is across the whole stretch of the project area. You know, all of this is really trying to keep in mind what we heard from the community through our outreach last year and through the stakeholder meetings at the kind of summer of this year, with these kind of 4 primary themes. And again, just back to the schedule here, you know, this is a presentation that we're still working on for the Planning Commission. And as I mentioned, it would get divided up for each of the commissions. But the kind of idea is to send this out at the end of October. And then through November, we'll be putting a website together, and that website is available to share this plan with anybody that wants to, you know, has questions or wants to know more. And we'll also do a webinar along with that. And then we'll have these kind of planning commissions that are more discussion based, just to ensure that they're aware of the work that's happening and understand that this would be coming to them once it's completed in February for their review and hopeful approval. Thank you for your time, and definitely open to any feedback or questions at the time, or of course, as I mentioned, you know, anything that comes up as you think about this, you know, feel free to email Soren and I can respond, you know, in the future.
Brandon, thanks, Brandon. Sorry, thinking of another name. Appreciate your presentation. That was very informative. Anybody have any questions or anything for Brandon?
Yes, this is Eric. I have my hand up.
Great. Oh, sorry.
That's
Go
all
We've
right.
ahead.
got Eric, and then Dan Potts has got his hand up as well.
I thought Dan would put his hand up. All right, thanks. Well, I'm just across the street from Tracy Aviary, looking at this. And I appreciate the work you all have done. I met with the Rio folks down at the Confluence about a year and a half ago, I think. And was just wondering on that trail on both sides, I agree. It's a really good idea, especially through here, because there used to be a bunch of issues down on the west side, you know, between 33rd and 39th. Was wondering if you had considered making a not as wide trail that's more kind of goes back and forth a little bit, so it slows people down, because, you know, it's a great commuter trail, but I think if we had one side that was wider and then the other side that was more, had like bump outs and more places you could just you know, take your time and have you know, traffic slowing devices, 6-foot wide trail. I know there's been a big move towards like 16 to 20-foot wide pavement trail, but there's really no much room here, you know, to buffer the river. So is there a consideration for sort of having a different feel on both sides? And then as a follow-up for that, improving the vegetative buffer at the bridges in order to reduce the noise, because I can hear 3300 South really loud. You can't even talk when you're over there. But just those kind of more of a naturalized, but still providing more ability for surveillance and ability for the you know, the police to get through and things like that, if you're going to have it on both sides. Thank you.
Thanks, Eric. Dan, or do you want to answer any of that, Brandon, or respond to any of that?
I'm happy to respond to it. I really appreciate those comments. Yes, we are considering what the trail looks like, and as you mentioned, it changes in how much space, what the topography is, and those are things that we are currently diving into in more detail. You know, looking at exactly where properties are and what the topography is through the kind of contours of that area to understand what's possible. We are also are thinking about what future capacity looks like. To your point, you know, right now the kind of trail is a standard width of 10 across it. You know, do we expand the primary trail? And as you mentioned, do we have the secondary trail be more sinuous, or is there something more like a 10-foot section that's paved, that's more dedicated to bike, but with like a 4-foot on one side, or like a 3-foot and 3-foot on each side that are more of a soft material? like a crushed, crushed refines or something similar to that, that again allow walkers and bikers to be in there, kind of have separate zones for that exact reason. Those are all a series of things we're looking at, and how much of that is consistent across the whole versus how much of that is, let's say, specific to areas we're moving through. So again, appreciate that comment, and definitely something I think those were great comments that we'll keep in mind as we think about what that looks like.
Great,
Thank you. I'd be happy to follow up with you on one-on-one. Just to mention, if you're gonna put a soft trail on one side or the other, I might suggest you go wider on one side, having just finished the Provo Delta project. With steep sided, berms, there's not enough room on both sides to have the clearance you need for ADA or for safety reasons. So just consider wider soft path on one side. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Dan.
Yeah, great presentation, Brandon. So I want to coattail Eric, but to a little bit more of an extreme. I agree with everything he said so far, but our organization is a wildlife organization, the oldest one in the state. We think that dedicating at least one side of the river largely to wildlife is only correct, especially at certain reaches. We like the idea of having even paved trails on both sides to complete loops, but we also believe that most of those loops are not by bicyclists. Most of those loops are created by dog walkers and bird watchers and etc. And so I think picking and choosing areas that should be left far more wild, especially when they're adjacent to far larger wildlife areas like the Redwood Nature Area, that makes more sense. And so specifically on that lower end of segment 6 and specifically 7, as that warm water comes in from Mill Creek, from the sewer treatment plant or whatever, that attracts immense numbers of waterfowl, especially in the migratory periods, right? And I've recommended numerous times to bird watchers to go down there and see the various things that you can't see anywhere else on the Jordan River. And I think Tracy would agree with me. But anyway, I think having a trail on both sides of that reach is just really a bad idea. I can't even see why we would, because you would lose a lot of that wildlife just because they're so sensitive to humans. You know what I mean? And it's a big wide area, but still, you understand. I think that bird watchers would kind of be bummed out because they wouldn't be seeing the golden eyes and all the grebes and all the cool things that we love to see in that reach. So anyway, that's all I got.
All right, thank you.
Appreciate that, Dan.
Anybody else?
And yeah, just the only thing I'll say is I think that's one of the things that's exciting about the area is that when we've been talking with Rio about the potential for that to be a wildlife and waterfowl destination. And I think the way that we've been thinking about it is a lot of the programming that I was showing would happen maybe more over by the Utah Convention Center and where that's already being activated. You've also got that kind of power substation there, but then using the other area for some more of those passive activities where you are able to kind of get out there and find a place to be able to kind of sit, bird watch, or otherwise just be in that natural setting. Interpretive signage I mentioned, just understanding some of the ecology and trying to restore a lot of the native species that are there. So
I have a question.
Yes.
So I want to comment on that because Dan, I totally appreciate what you're saying, and I love that you have that opportunity still, and I hope we have it for a long time to come. And South Salt Lake has one of the areas that does have the most potential for that, and it was designed for that as the wetland mitigation area. But unfortunately, the history of that area for the last 20 years or so has been one of kind of degradation and slow tearing out of trees that were tearing out of soil, people living back there, people setting fires, etc., which has really not resulted in better habitat, but worse. So one of the exciting parts about Tracy moving onto the corridor is a fenced space that's controlled and stewarded. So I don't know if you guys have considered any other areas that you might consider fencing and habitat restoration or kind of having controlled access to. And I don't have, our city doesn't own anything, so I don't have anything specific other than the space I know that probably deserves a little more attention as a suggestion for where to do that.
Yeah, and we typically refer to those as pots again, refer to those as rest areas or nature preserves, because the whole point is you're excluding the public from just some areas to just to deal with the issues.
Totally.
Yeah,
And at minimum,
provide some place for the lily pad, some place for birds or things to touch down. That's all.
at minimum, other mammals from harassing them, people, dogs, and if other pets,
Thank
And I really love everything you're showing here, and I think that's a general comment that I've had to come to terms with is how do we have a sense of safety and control in an area that's not patrolled. So I do actually like your idea of that road. It feels like it gives a human space in a predictable way. And I think that's would be nice on the west side, just south of South Salt Lake. But I also don't see a lot of these are more vague concepts, but don't see a ton of preservation ideas that have like a real restoration bent versus a people bent to it.
Yeah, I appreciate that, Sharon, and we'll continue to pull those out. I think some of them are maybe I didn't focus on talking about them as much, but as part of that, some of that restoration and those side channels, a lot of that area that starts to become in between there, just by the nature of having, the side channels are obviously going to change in which their fullness is throughout the year, depending on the raininess of the year or the season, etc. But in general, those areas start to become, a lot of the idea is that they start to become, we promote native species and start to kind of have that conversion towards a more natural setting. But also looking at ways, just from a lot of the conversations we've had with you and other jurisdictions, is how we don't create the atmospheres that have caused some of the problems with encampments and other issues that you've talked about here. So yeah, it's an interesting balance, but we do want to ensure that we're capitalizing on some of these expanded areas that the county has land where we can have both, right? Where you can use edges to have people be able to move through, but then find areas that are, a little bit harder, basically hard to access, but provide that natural kind of
because sometimes
designated natural area.
Having both is like kind of standard around urban areas, that you let all things happen in the same place, and it doesn't really end up being high quality for either. And then I just wanted to comment on the map that applied to South Salt Lake. There is the yellow coverage over the county property that's shown, and there's a cutout shown where the Men's Resource Center is, but there's an additional property just south of that now the city owns, that was given to us from the county, that is now designated for a law enforcement building. So I don't know if it really should show in that yellow color or not. I mean, we'd like to be creative about how public can access it, but we've got very limited purposes for that, and you might reflect that on that map.
Yeah, that's the police substation that we were talking about, right? Yeah, that we'll definitely get that more clearly put on there. That's definitely something we're aware of, and
great.
think will be a really helpful, safety amenity for that area.
So I just wanted to point that out for other people too.
I'd like to follow on Sharon's discussion, because her and I worked closely on the what we call Meadowbrook, which is 3900 south and around General Holmes area. And it's been a high level of challenge down there, because it's a mitigation site for, water supplies in Little Dell and Mountain Dell area for impacts up there. And it was preserved and set aside without clear wildlife goals that say, how will you actually maintain the wildlife goals in this area? And I think there's some competing goals. But having it surveillable is critical, because we've taken down a couple, I guess, cottonwood cabins, we'll call them, down there, and people dug down into holes and things. I mean, it's probably the most challenging place, I'll say, that I've worked on down there. But making it so it's surveillable with like maybe a 3 or 4 foot wide soft trail, which is what we kind of tried to do, and lift it up, especially at the trailheads where you can see through, but then has some riparian canopy that is maintained for the birds. And then also some buffers, as Dan mentioned, around some of the, wet water areas, so the ducks can land, at least the 10-foot buffer. And so I'd be happy to walk the area. And Sharon, let's get out there and
Let's do
look
it.
at it.
And I
Oh,
have
sorry,
to
go
go
ahead,
back
Sherry.
to my depressing hardening the site conversation, but I don't see any other law enforcement, public safety, fire people on this. And we work regularly in a small group that many people on this call come to occasionally talking about the issues we have with the Jordan River, and they're always asking for ways to just like limit the areas they have to patrol, limit the access to everything, so that there's this very simple, clear go here and here and here. Like their checkpoints are smaller, and so to me that has a dual purpose of well, you get some areas away, like Tracy area, that has a very specific defined purpose, and that cuts out the hassle and all the it cuts off the overall general public access anywhere. But there's a lot of land and a lot of opportunities for people down here for recreation that I think if you like really more clearly define each thing, you might have more success on each of them doing well and being patrolled well.
Thank you, Sharon. I'm going to turn up. Public safety is our next agenda item, actually. So that's good timing as well. I'm going to turn it over to Soren. I see your hand is up, and then Dan, and then we should definitely switch over to our next agenda item. So on public safety, Soren.
Yeah, just real quick, a big thank you to Salt Lake County and to Brandon and his team. A lot of great work here. It's hard trying to cram all of it into a short window in our meeting, and I know there's a lot more to this. Brandon, you might just give a quick update about some of the work outreach you're going to be doing with the 5 cities and the Planning Commission meetings that I think are coming up over the next month or so, because those will be additional opportunities for input and coordination.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Basically the goal in the November stakeholder planning commission meetings is that we are sharing something fairly similar to this, that is a higher level, presentation that will then be able to kind of get them caught up to speed with the goals of the project, what the kind of schedule is and the timeline. We will then be working, and this is where a lot of the stuff that is a little bit more detailed about the safety and really starting to define how this would work within kind of parcels and limits and more specific kind of concepts for each of these kind of projects that we've talked about or shared today. We'll start to develop in advance, and then that will go in front of the. We'll keep conversations with the jurisdictions, with you all. And of course with the community through kind of outreach and digital platforms open, and then we'll keep that moving as we start to develop the idea of basically putting this in front of the Planning Commission, and in some cases the City Council in February or March. So there's kind of a series of kind of milestones that we're trying to hit over the next 4 months to be able to get this plan built out. In the end, this will be a pretty comprehensive report. So of course, as Soren mentioned, this is we're trying to get this into something that we can present within a 40-minute period, but ultimately there'll be a report that really highlights and details a lot of in more depth a lot of what I covered here, as well as continuing to work on answers to the responses and feedback you all are giving us, which is super helpful.
Thank you, Brandon. One other quick follow-up item, and this might be a question more for maybe Dan and Angelo. I know when this project was first presented to the community, this goes clear back to when Ben McAdams was the mayor, and this idea of a regional park was generated and resulted in ideas competition and other things the following year through the mayoral transition. I noticed that it's not being referred to as a regional park, but as a recreation area. But what it looks like is a series of smaller, kind of regional parks or, collections of park space across multiple jurisdictions. Anything you might identify so that we are referring to this in the right way as we move forward, and maybe not using the term regional park as we have for many years?
Yeah, that's one of the things that Angelo and the county and I have been discussing recently, and that kind of came out of some of the discussions of your meeting. But at the front of the presentation, one of the things that changed, Soren, from when you last saw this is that we now are calling it the Jordan River Recreation Area Master Plan. And so that basically follows the legislature's terminology, just for continuity there.
Okay.
Obviously, that's different from what's on the big sign across the bridge that says, Jordan River Regional Park. So I think we'll keep working with the county on how to specifically term this. But again, from a continuity standpoint, we picked up the legislation naming of the area, since it is very explicitly defined within that legislation, given the boundaries of it as a recreation area.
Yeah, I might suggest, carefully doing that, because the Jordan River Recreation Area in the legislation is a funding program, and it covers the entire Jordan River from Utah Lake to Great Salt Lake. It's not just this zone. This area is referred to as a zone for additional investment, but the Jordan River Recreation Area refers to the entire length of the Jordan River across all 3 counties. So I might just suggest using that terminology a little bit cautiously, so that there's not confusion between the funding program, which is the legislative initiative, and what we're doing here. We can talk about that later, but just something to avoid confusion. Dan Potts, real quick. Gina had to drop off. She asked, and Marion's on the road, may not have great cell coverage. So Gina asked me if I'd close out the meeting with the remaining items on the agenda. So I'll kind of take over as the secretary and chair it. So Don, let's cover your question, and then we'll move on to our next discussion.
Yeah, Dan the fisherman here. So hey, Soren, appreciate I could quick. Okay. So I'm always quick. So Jordan River Commission facilitated an effort to reduce inappropriate lighting for bird migrations, but also for fishing to promote nature, really. And so we went through a process to identify fishing locations and evaluate appropriate ideas to try to enhance those. Why would you want to enhance a fishing location other than to catch fish? Oh, that's how I became, who I am today, is because of fishing on the Jordan River. And so when you're sitting in a nice, comfortable place, so recreational opportunities to improve, access and places to sit and be comfortable and watch nature are just huge to the public. And so, and also it adds eyeballs to the area so that you reduce crime and all that kind of stuff too. And so I just think that that's a great idea to add. I heard you dropped the word fish once, Brandon, but I think fishing could be a real huge portion of the benefits that we can get out of the Jordan. That's all.
Appreciate that. Thanks, Dan.
Yeah, good reminder. Okay, well, thank you everybody for your great questions and discussion. This won't be the last. We'll talk about this planning initiative, and we'll share additional details as those next stages of moving forward. Brandon, thank you so much for joining us today, and please give our best to your team. We really appreciate all of the thought and work going into this.
Yeah,
All right.
thank you so much.